Okay, students, today we will be starting a very important topic in your CNS, which is your sensory receptors. As you know that nervous system is divided into two parts, a peripheral nervous system and a central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system comprises of your afferent division or the sensory division and the motor division or efferent division. We are basically concerned with your sensory or your afferent part of your nervous system, which is bringing the information to your central nervous system, which is the sensory or afferent portion of the nervous system is bringing the information to your central nervous system. Lots of information is continuously being brought to your nervous system that is classified either as your now listen to this carefully. This is very important, and no absolute classification of your sensory system and your sensory receptors exist. All are the arbitrary classification. I am just making you sorry, I am just making you familiar with the main classifications which are in place. So one classification of your senses or your sensory receptor is into conscious or unconscious. Conscious, as the name says, at any given time lots of information is not reaching your conscious level. For example, pH of your blood, oxygen tension of your blood, glucose concentration. While lots of information is your reaching into your conscious level, the touch, the pain, the temperature, etc, etc. So this division is conscious or unconscious. Another valid division of your sensory nervous system or your senses is into visceral, somatic, and spatial. Visceral, somatic, and spatial. Visceral is that senses which are coming from your viscera. Now, special senses. Special senses are those senses, the receptors for which are at a particular place in your body. Special senses are those senses, the receptors for which are at a particular place in your body. These include your vision, sight, audition, hearing, smell, olfaction, taste, gustation, and equilibrium. So these are the special senses: vision, olfaction, gustation, audition, and equilibrium. Equilibrium, the receptors for equilibrium are in your ear. You obviously you cannot see with your hands, you cannot hear with your feet, you cannot taste with your leg. So these are classified as special senses. Now we will talk about your the things which we will be talking about is your somatic senses. As the name implies, somatic senses which arise from the body. Somatic senses are further classified into somesthetic and proprioceptive. Somesthetic are those senses which arise from the surface of the body. Proprioceptive are those senses which arise from your inner tissues. Proprioception. Proprioception is awareness of your position in space. At any time you know whether you are sitting, lying, standing, your leg is flexed or not flexed, that thing. That the awareness of your position in space is called as proprioception. When you add a dynamic component to the proprioception, like when you are walking, you know that you are walking. Like when you are moving your hand, you know that you are moving your hand. That changing proprioception is called as kinesthesia. So, in the nutshell, we are talking about your somatic senses. Somatic senses are somesthetic senses and proprioceptive senses. Proprioceptive senses, when become dynamic, they are called as kinesthetic senses. Before we move on, there is another classification of senses into pure and synthetic. Pure and synthetic. Pure are those senses for which a receptor is reserved. Synthetic senses are those senses which are compound, for which many things combine. Example, the pure senses include touch, pain, warm, cold, and not to forget itch. Again, pure senses are those senses for which the receptors are specified. They include touch, cold, warm, pain, and itch. Itch, kharish. There are receptors which only respond to itch. There are receptors in this you need to stress on the fact that we have included warm and cold as separate senses, while all the other senses, your vibration, pressure, all are these are your synthetic senses. The feeling of wetness, dryness, or the flavor, they are all your synthetic senses. We know that they are combination of many senses. So we are basically dealing with your somesthetic senses, which are your this is one classification of your somatic senses. The most valid classification of your senses, or hence your sensory receptors. First of all, what are receptors? Receptors in your neurophysiology, they are different from the receptors which bind with ligands, like the receptors which are binding with neurotransmitters, like the receptors which are binding with hormones, etc., etc. In your neurophysiology, the word receptor is used in a separate context. The receptors in neurophysiology, they are called as transducers. Transducers means that they convert one form of energy into another form of energy. All the sensory modalities are present in some form of energy. That energy is converted into a action. How that stimuli, what is the stimulus? Stimulus is any detectable change in the environment. That is a stimulus. So that thing is a energy. So a receptor converts one form of energy into another form of energy. Obviously, you are feeling warm, cold, touch, pain. These are your finger is feeling the pain. Your finger is feeling the warmth. But how that warm, pain, touch, that change in glucose level, the change in pH level, how that thing is conveyed to the brain, that is achieved by help of receptors. Hence the receptors are transducers, which convert one form of energy into another form of energy, which is the action potential. All the information is carried to your CNS by in the form of action potential. So according to this, the receptors are classified depending upon their stimulus energy. So in this classification, we have got mechanoreceptors, we have got thermoreceptors, we have got chemoreceptors, we have got electromagnetic receptors, and we have got nociceptors. So according to the stimulus energy, we have got mechanoreceptors which respond to mechanical distortion. We have got thermal receptors which responds to change in temperature. Note again, there are separate receptors for warmth and cold that we will elaborate on later. There are chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptors are receptors which respond to a chemical. Namely, your chemoreceptors are your taste, smell, all the receptors present in your aortic or pulmonary body which are responding to oxygen, osmolality, etc. etc. All are your chemoreceptors. Uh, Remember, we talked about H. H is also included in your chemoreceptors. So, basically, when we are talking about your somatic receptors, somasthetic receptors, which are present on your skin, all we are dealing with are your mechanoreceptors. Another classification of these is into they are all responding to touch, proprioception. They are all mechanoreceptors. They are all mechanoreceptors. These are present in the skin. These are present in the deeper tissue. The proprioceptors are present in your deeper tissues, present around the joints, in the tendons, in the muscle. The two important proprioceptors are your muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ. You will be studying about them, the proprioceptor, in detail in when you will be talking about your motor activity. Uh, Look, H is again classified as chemoreceptor. They are all of these are your special senses receptors. The visual receptors are photoreceptors, auditory receptors, and the receptors for balance are again your mechanoreceptors. They respond to mechanical change. The ones which we are did the we will talk about pain later on, but at the moment we are dealing with the mechanoreceptors present in your skin which are responding to your touch mechanics. These are main classes of your cutaneous receptors, somasthetic receptors. Then there are other as well, but the ones which you are concerned with are your Meissner's corpuscles, Merkel discs, Pacinian corpuscles, Ruffini organs, hair receptors, free nerve endings. These two were the Golgi tendon organ and muscle spindle were your proprioceptors. They are present in your deep tissues, in the muscles, in the joint capsule, in the tendons, and around. So we are dealing with these six. One, two, three, four, five, six. Forget about cross. Again the same thing. The Meissner corpuscles, the Merkel disc, the Pacinian, the Ruffinis. Not to forget the free nerve endings and hair and organs. That completes the list. Meissner corpuscle, Merkel disc, Pacinian, Ruffini, free nerve ending, hair and organs. Look, different types of your cutaneous receptors: Meissner corpuscles, Ruffini's, Pacinians, Merkel discs, hair receptors. As we just said, that your receptors are transducers which convert one form of energy into action potential. This thing is called as your signal transduction. How the energy is converted into an action potential. Some things you must make note about is that how to remember all this information which you are receiving. You can categorize your receptor into superficial or deep. Meissner and Merkel are superficial receptors. So are your hair end organs and your Meissner's and Merkel's are superficial receptors. So are your hair end organs and free nerve endings. While your Ruffini's and Pacinian are your deeply placed receptors. Free nerve endings, hair end organs, and Merkel discs. These three: free nerve endings, hair and organs, Merkel discs. They don't have a capsule around them. All the others, the Meissners, the Ruffini's, and the Pacinians, they have got a capsule around them. They are called as capsulated receptors, while these are called as uncapsulated receptors. The capsulated receptors are also sometimes referred to as encapsulated with an E. En. Encapsulated means they have got a capsule, and uncapsulated means that they don't have got a capsule. So the receptors are usually dendritic ends of a sensory neuron which might or might not be associated with non-neural cells. Coming again, receptors are transducers. They are the dendritic ends of sensory neurons which might or might not be associated with non-neural cells. We have categorized the receptors: superficial, deep. Superficial are your Meissner, Merkel, hair and organs, free nerve endings. Deep are Pacinians, Ruffini's. Uncapsulated, free nerve endings, hair and organs, uncapsulated, don't have a capsule around them. All the other, the Meissners, the Pacinians, the Ruffini's, they have got a capsule around them. Encapsulated, En with an E, not with an U. These are uncapsulated, these are encapsulated or simply capsulated. Another thing to remember about Merkel discs, they are also called as expanded tip receptors. A collection of Merkel discs is called as ego-dome receptors. IGGO, ego-dome receptors. Nothing difficult in that, only the names are difficult. The Merkel discs, a collection of Merkel discs, is called a ego-dome receptors. expanded tip receptors, Merkel discs, collection of Merkel discs, ego dome receptors. Uh, Merkel disc. Acha. Now, as a rule of the thumb, remember all the as we said that the sensory receptors are the dendritic ends of the sensory neurons. All the receptors have got A beta nerve fibers. A alpha is just concerned with your proprioception. C is concerned with pain. All the somatic senses, somesthetic senses, they have got A beta nerve fiber. Myelinated, speed around 70 to 100. Associated with non-neural structure, associated with non-neural structures. The modality which they are conveying, one by one. Meissner corpuscles. They are present in your non-hairy skin, also called as your glabrous skin. They detect the fine touch. Hair and organs detect the movement around the skin. Merkel discs detect the pressure. Pressure is not a separate sense. Just a sustained touch is called as pressure. Sustained touch is called pressure. Pacinian again detects your deep touch. Ruffini's again detect your deep touch because these are deeply placed, they detect deep touch. Another property of another thing which must be remembered are your Pacinians detect vibration. Meissners also detect vibration. Hair and organs detect movement on the skin. Now coming on to free nerve endings. The most abundant of your receptors are your free nerve endings. Free nerve endings are also called as anatomically non-specific but physiologically specific. What? Free nerve endings are the most abundant of your cutaneous receptors. They are physiologically physiologically specific, anatomically non-specific. There are places in your body where only receptors are your free nerve endings, like back dorsum of your fingers, hair, cornea, just to name a few. Here at these few places, you won't find all these receptors, the Meissner, the Merkel, the Pacinian. But they only have got free nerve endings. And these free nerve endings detect warm, detect cold, detect pain, detect touch, all the manifestations of touch, the pressure, the vibration. Pressure is sustained touch, vibration is repeated touch. Mainly vibration is detected by Pacinian and Meissners, but the free nerve endings, since they are physiologically physiologically specific, anatomically non-specific, they detect all the modalities of sensation. Another thing about your receptor is their adaptation. We have talked about superficial, deep, capsulated, uncapsulated, their modalities which they are conveying. Another thing is their adaptation. Adaptation. This we will talk about when we are talking about other things. So now we come on to how your receptor, how the stimulus is a detectable change in the environment, is converted into a action potential in your sensory nerve fiber. This is called as your signal transduction.